Okay, so I'm Yves Hanoulle. I'm going to talk about the power of habits. You see a calendar that I followed something that was a calendar to create habits about creativity. And so I'll use that later on as an example. Just a warning for this is that you will only get out of this and most of the sessions that I'm doing, you get out the quality what you put in. So I asked you to think about your habit. Unfortunately, in this one, we won't have time to do the full exercises. If you're still interested, I can propose something in open space immediately to then actually do it. So this is much more talking. But still, it's really good to think about your habit. So what I would like you to do is rethink about that bad habit that you had when I asked you this morning. So think about that bad habit and talk to your neighbor about it. You get about 1 minute to talk to your neighbor about that bad habit. Go. Okay, that's 1 minute. Thank you. So this is how I prefer to start. I prefer that you talk to each other about yourself than just about me. But people said to me that I still have to have a slide about me. So I just, during the previous presentation that talked about simplicity, I made this a lot simpler. I have the habit of changing mine and other habits and some examples. And I started that as a change agent when I did this. I changed some stuff at home as well. Please, what's said in this room, so you talked about a habit, a bad habit, let's keep this in here. So don't go off rushing now, you know about this, that person. No, please, let's keep this in this room. That makes it a little bit better. It's really important to know that, so this is most about the book, The Power of Habits. I didn't invent all of that. It's a really great book. And one of the things that he says in there is that 48% of the actions are habits. Now just think about it. Think about what you did when you got up this morning until you came here. 48% of what you did were habits. Brushing your teeth, getting out of bed, you do it without really thinking. Try just for a change tomorrow to brush your teeth with your other hand. You will see it's much harder. If you do it right-handed or left-handed, try changing it, and it's really hard. Why? Because you have 20, 30, 50, maybe 80 years experience of brushing your teeth with your right or your left hand. That's habits. And why is that? Because our brain really wants to save efforts. This is a picture about, I don't know, a year, 2 years old, of my daughter that learned to drive a bicycle. And actually, about 10 or 20 seconds after I took the picture, she fell down because she was still learning, and yeah, it didn't work out that well that day. And now, about a year later, she can do it without thinking. It's becoming a habit, and she can think much more about the traffic, because that's not yet a habit. But the driving, and if I remember when I started driving a car, I thought I didn't touch the wheel much, and I was driving straight, but if I look back, really what I was doing was like this, because I used like most part of the streets. And now, it's much more a habit, and I think much less about it, but I still keep touching the wheel as much as before, but the movements are much smaller, so it's much more habits that came there. And there is actually nothing that you can't do if you can get your habits right. This is a picture that's taken from a bunch of people that live in my city that went on to run to the Mont Ventoux, I think. They run it up, and most of them had not run before, like, I think about 6 months before or something. They just got into the habit of running 1, 2, sometimes some people did it 3 times every week. And they got into that habit. And once they got into the habit after a few months, they said, you know what, we should have a goal. And somebody came up with a crazy idea, oh, let's go up to that mountain, so blah, blah, blah. And a few months later, that's what they did. So let's look a little bit more clearly about the habit, because typically when we want to change the habit, what we think about is, I don't like that habit and I want to have another thing. But what really happens is there is a cue, something that tells you something, it's not showing that nice, you have a routine, and then there is a reward. And what science says is that, let's look at the example of this one. So one of the things that help these people is getting shoes. So people that don't run in the same group, they put their shoes on a certain place. When they come home, they see their shoes and say, oh yeah, I should go running. So there's a clue that helps people to remember it. Because if they don't have that clue, they don't do it. And then they do they do the routine, and in the end, they have the reward. Well, this is the biggest reward in the end when they finished it, but there's also just a reward afterwards of being happy about having run. There is some signs about that, what people feel after they have run, or you could look at some other examples. So that's really the habit that they were into. So what we don't have the time now, but we'll do that in the open space for those who are interested, is we will look at your habits and think about what's really the routine, because that's probably the thing that you don't like about it. And what's really happening is that once you have this clue, the routine, and you have the reward, is you create what they call a craving brain. So the brain really wants to have that reward. You put me somewhere, anywhere in the world, anywhere, any place, where there are some books, and probably within 10 minutes I will start reading without even thinking about it. My wife loved it at first. Now, 6 years later, it drives her crazy. But I don't even think about it. Yeah? There is a book somewhere. It's not that I'm bored or whatever. It's just something that I've learned when I was younger. Yeah? And so I quickly pick up books and I start reading. Yeah? Somehow my brain is doing that. And it's an interesting part. This is something that happened on holiday. My son doesn't like that I tell this story because he disagrees with some parts. But okay, I think it's a very nice example. So you see him. He broke his arm on holiday. So I think we agree that he didn't like it at this point. He's in pain. So that's the cue. Of course, the routine is his mother gets into being worried and wanting to help and caring about. So that's one routine that's working there. So you see him, and that's his reward, or that's what he's getting. So of course he says, no, I didn't do that on purpose. I don't say that. But that's part of what's happening. Yeah, you see him, you see this, and my mother, my wife, my wife starts to worry about that, and he gets some kind of reward. So and then of course she's happy because he feels much nicer, because right now he's much happier and he didn't start complaining anymore. So we even see that at multiple levels. And so now he's really happy. And then my wife's happy, of course. So what we'll do in the exercise, if you're interested, is then look at what are your cues. Because you know your routines. The things you want to change is really your routines. We'll look at that. But what's even more important is to think about your cues. What is making you do that? If people talk to me in the break, said, oh, okay, the thing I want to change is, okay, I smoke. Okay, let's see if we can first look at what are the cues. What makes you smoke? What makes you take up that cigarette? And what was interesting is that in the book there is an example about brain surgery they did on alcoholics. And they removed part, don't try this at home. They removed part of the brain that makes people want, so these alcoholics want to drink alcohol. So the physical desire is gone. These people, they don't want to drink alcohol anymore. So they did some, but what they noticed is it didn't help a lot of them. They kept drinking. Why? Because they had their habits. They had the habit when their cue, and for some of them it's I feel miserable, so I feel miserable, I go to a bar and I drink something. Yeah? And that habit changed. So from the moment they still felt the cue, like I'm lonely, blah, 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 they started drinking, going to a bar or doing something. And this is why when the AA did some things, they didn't have any science behind it at the time, but now a lot of science is there that prove that basically what they did is that they had that cue, feeling bad or whatever, and they replaced it by another habit, meaning call one of your friends that is also in AA and talk about it, which brings the same reward as I feel better now. It's much more complex than that, but that seems to have worked much better than just removing part of the brains. And really, habits never really disappear. When this picture was taken, I probably hadn't built castles in like 10 years or 20 or more, and some of these things you can still, I'm not saying I'm not as good as my daughter, she's a lot better at it, but still, some of the habits stay there. And sometimes good and sometimes that's bad. Because it could mean that 10 years later, you go somewhere else and in a certain environment you will do that again. Because that habit stays in you. It might be nice, in this case for my daughter, but it could be that you're used to, I don't know, used to going out and smoking, and then you stopped smoking for 10 years, but all of a sudden you go out at a conference and you start smoking again, because with dancing, somehow you have the habit of taking a cigarette. And that's something I heard last night. I didn't. So the golden rule of changing habits is having that cue, look at the routine, look at the rewards you're getting, but don't try to change the full thing. Try to bring a new routine into that. But before you can do that, you need to understand really the three parts of it. This is why a lot of people, when they stopped smoking, they start chewing gum and things like that. Because it's basically the same cue, more or less the same reward, but you do pick up a new habit. So that's really what makes it a lot better. So that brings us back in the exercise to think, what can you change? I took this picture because I'm drinking a lot of coffee these days, and I learned to drink coffee when I worked at Coca-Cola, because I was drinking a ton of cola before I would even work there, and then one day I came at work and I saw, I don't know, 6, 7 cans on my desk. I knew I drank some Coke in the car. I knew I drank a liter or more at home. It's like, this is not really healthy. And I started drinking coffee there. So I changed that habit into another. I'm not saying that was so much smarter or so much better, but that's a habit I changed there. So one other thing that can help is you can record when it happens. So because if you record it, because don't blame yourself for doing it. It's already helping if you would know every time you pick up a cigarette or you do something else. So this is why I'm wearing a step counter. Yeah? So that helps me to see how much I'm moving. Actually, this is the wrong picture. I should have taken this one. This is from last night. So you can see that actually I should go out dancing much more because I move a lot. Yeah? It's actually a lot healthier. So we can then discuss what's that kind of songs that they play there, but that's a different story. But yeah, you can really see that when I came in my hotel or in my bed last night, I had already 12,000 steps. Most people don't do 12,000 steps in, that's not good, don't do 12,000 steps in one day. So this is just going out. Now I understand why I felt much fitter when I was younger, when I went dancing a lot more. Because, yeah, I was moving a lot more. So, but when you record it, when things happen, yeah, you start to understand much better. Because most people, if you do the exercise, you will see, I have no idea what's the clue. What's the cue? What is making me take that cigarette? Or making, I don't know, kiss strangers on the street or whatever your bad habit is. Just try to record it. Try to see when you're doing it and just take a note. Take a pencil with you, and every time you see it yourself doing it, and of course, hopefully, when you do that, you might say, "Oh, I was about to take a cigarette." Okay, so you can take 2 columns: one for when you actually did it, one for when you didn't do it. But don't blame yourself too much. Just start recording. So that's something similar that what I've done or what I do also with teams. We start recording what happens. So this is supposed to be a burn down, but you see this is the ideal chart, and this is what the team is doing, so not really good. This is the number of tasks. We recorded at both things, so at the same time the tasks and just the total of stories. And which is really interesting, because in here, the last day of the sprint, they actually added a story. Well, like, there's no way you're going to do all of this. We have history in the full sprint that you're not making it at all. And still, for whatever reason, they decided to add something. Okay, let's just make it visible. And I agree with what was said before when what Angel was saying is when you make things visible, it's not always nice. People don't always like it. But okay, you have to start telling people, okay, it's not to blame, it's just about making it visible. The same thing for your own habits. Make it visible, what are the things you're doing wrong. And then, yeah, probably, and what when most people happens is when you start making it visible, you start making slow changes because you feel embarrassed or whatever, you start to understand it better and you do it less. Or not, that's okay. Just start recording, know what happens. So who knows this movie? Yeah. So habits are one thing. Yeah. And if you remember, who remembers this scene? Who knows what's happening here? Wax on, wax off. How does he feel at this moment? Very, very stupid. He hates it. Yeah. He's actually what he's learning. He's learning new habits that he can lose later, but he doesn't understand that. You also have to believe. Now, what's this scene about? The final fight, and this is the moment that he starts to believe in it, that he starts to understand, hey, I can win this. I don't remember the details anymore, but he has a leg broken or something like that, so he's actually, most people would just give up. But he started to believe in it, and he starts to understand, hey, I have some habits that can help me. And that helps you. But know that there are some stories in the book about teams that get a new idea, get a new thing, and the teams don't believe in it. They have learned a new trick, and we don't have time to go into the full thing, but really read the book because it has tons of really nice stories about people learning new things, learning new habits, but really it only starts to work when they believe in it. So there is one about habits be thinking. This is a story about a rugby team, and what that trainer or coach is doing is most of these teams, they learn very difficult movements on how to move on the field, and that coach does completely opposite. Most of them have like 100 or 200 positions and make it very difficult. He has about 2 or 3 possible things that need to happen, and all their competitors know it. And he doesn't care because they practice all the time to make sure to look at some cues when this or that person on the field is making that move, it actually means that they were going to do that. And what they're learning is they create that into a habit. They want them to make it automatically. When they see an action like that, they're already gone. And they're at the right place where the other person is going to receive the ball. And it's working really well for them until the finals. And then they think, oh, this is so important, and they start thinking again and they lose. And they fire the coach, and it takes the second team, I think the second or the third team, before people actually start to believe and actually win finals. And so now his method is used all over America. But interesting thing about Starbucks. I know a lot of people don't like Starbucks for all kinds of reasons, but in the book there are some really nice stories about what is, okay, maybe a good question. What is Starbucks actually selling? No. No. Oh. Happiness. They try to sell happiness. And Wi-Fi is something that a lot of people need for happiness. Coffee is another thing. And so, but they try to sell happiness. But who are the people working at Starbucks? These are people who have low-paid jobs. And if you want to sell happiness, people need to be smiling and to be acceptance. But most of their people, well, at least me, in the morning, when I haven't had coffee, I'm probably not the nicest customer to have because I want the things moving, and you have about 5 or 10 other people like that. So what's bad about that is that they should always be smiling and helping us. But these are people who can't have other jobs because they have a lot of trouble. So what Starbucks learned very early is that they have to create routines and they have to create habits into these people so that they can react. So they've invested a ton of money to learn people about themselves, to learn, and they have to actually record on the first day a lot of things, and they get hypothetical situations that they know will happen in real life, and these employees, they learn about that, and they learn to speak about if somebody like me comes in without a coffee and I act something, how would you react to that? To make sure that they don't start shouting at me, because then maybe I will never go to Amazon, to Starbucks again. So they invested. It's really interesting to see how much they invested in people. There is a story about a person there who I think at 6 or at 8, he had to reanimate, help his mother or father because they were dying from a drug overdose. So that's the kind of person who's in there now, thanks to Starbucks, is going on to a much higher life because he learned the new things. Because he didn't learn that at home, because he had 2 parents who were drug addicts and who couldn't keep even a job or do anything. And he's now a high employee at Starbucks because he learned a lot of these lessons there when he started. So really interesting there. So what I would like you to do is also think about your team's routines, because habits are personal, routines is much more at team level. So start to think about that, and start to think about, okay, what are the habits that my teams are having? And again, at that level, what are the cues? Yeah, what are the rewards? There is a reason why teams don't deliver or don't do this or that. If it's just one time, that's fine. If it's multiple times, one after a row, there is a routine. So that means there is some kind of cue, there is some kind of reward. Maybe the reward is we like to bitch about management, because that's how we feel connected. There is a very nice story in it about a CEO that the guy who was actually about to retire, and they asked him to come become a CEO of a company that's really going really bad, and they sell steel, so they have steel mills, something like that, and it takes a while before he accepts it, but when he finally accepts it, basically when he comes in, he does the opposite of what most CEOs do. Most CEOs, when they go to investors and when they're first assigned, they have large stories about blah, 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 how much money they will make and all that kind of stuff. And he does not much. He says, I will care about one thing. I will care about safety. And I will put safety first for everything. So basically, he's focusing and wanting to have the company focus on one thing. And the nice thing about safety is, of course, nobody can be against safety. So they have all these unions who are typically against the CIO and who are fighting also for safety for their own members, now supporting them. Of course, in the beginning, it's like, what's happening? But they really see that he means it. And he talks about it all over the world. And at one time, he's at a conference, and actually at the back, there is a nun who's saying, this is bullshit. What you're saying is just bullshit. There is no safety, because in this plant, in this city, we had, because he's saying on stage that we didn't have any accidents and blah, blah, blah for X number of months. And she says this is bullshit, because just last month we had an issue in this factory and somebody or 2 or 3 people almost died. And he says, no, I have the numbers, I can prove to you. But he still talks to her afterwards, and he invites her back to the plant to look at and to see that how safe it is. And it turns out that she's right. And actually, that when they visited, that they saw that there's a lot of dangerous things at that plant, but that manager of that plant was not reporting up. And so he has one big question afterwards. Okay, that manager, did you see him? No, we didn't see it, but it's very clear that he was aware of that. And that's a hotshot manager that's been going up very fast in the company, and he's just fired on the spot, and nobody even thinks about it. Everybody says, yeah, that manager just fired himself because he was hiding safety. And that's what the CEO did. In that 1 year, he turned people and made them clear that safety is really important, and he showed it at multiple levels. And that made it so much better. That's just one small thing he changed that had a huge impact, because that company made, like, I don't know the numbers anymore, but 10, 20, I don't know, a lot more money, and became very profitable. Why? Because he had everybody of the company focusing all together in one direction. And the nice thing is, to be more safe, they have to do this and to have to do that. So they have to be much more efficient, much more better. And he gives out his number or whatever to everybody, and what starts happening is that people start to call him for other things. Oh, I know I could call you just for safety, but you know what? We could save a lot of money if we don't do this, but if we also do that. And where before all these IDs were stuck at the bottom, now they these people have the phone of the CIO, so they call him for just IDs, and they make a lot more money out of that. There's an interesting story about food stands at plazas. In one of the, and I told it yesterday or 2 days ago in the bar as well, in one of these cities where there was a lot of riots and a lot of things going on, there is actually a very smart military officer who knows about these things, and he looks about and what is really happening. So there is the riot, okay, but let's look at the routines and the habit that's going before. And what he's noticed is that you have a lot of people, like 100, 200, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000 people gathering on a plaza, and they seem to be very fine, nothing, no riot, nothing happening. And they do that for a few hours. They get hungry, and there's actually a lot of food stands on these plazas, and they start eating, and it's only an hour after that or something that the riot starts. So what he's doing as a very smart intervener is he takes them away. He says no food stands are anymore allowed on these plazas, so they block the access. People can go on, but no food stands anymore. People, of course, they don't always like it because they cannot sell it, these food people, but still there's no food. So what's happening is after 2 hours or 3 hours, people start to get hungry. They don't see food, so they look and they go out of the plaza. They go to restaurants, they go to other places. These food stands might be on other locations, but not gathered anymore. And there's actually no riots happening anymore. So they don't need police with large shotguns and whatever. So probably they should do that in the US as well, and not just in other countries. But that they avoid a lot of riots this way. So this is the story about the power of habits. I hope you learned something from it. And I'll do an open space session later if you want to work on your own habits. Thank you very much.